What if there was evidence of fallen angels and giants as mentioned in the Bible and other books like the Book of Enoch, and that evidence has been right in front of us the whole time and not a secret? Maybe it's just been labeled wrong. That's what I'm thinking about today. This is one of my thought experiments. I have them sometimes. It's not a belief, and I wouldn't even call it a theory. It's just an idea I have, and then I sort of go down a rabbit hole of thinking about different possibilities. So it's just sort of a what-if scenario. This is how this one started. I knew we modern humans had a small amount of Neanderthal DNA in us. I think the average is around 2%. Some have a little more, some have a little less. But what I didn't know until the other day is that none of that is Y DNA, which is to say, the male DNA. Females have 2 X chromosomes, males have a X and a Y chromosome. So Y DNA only passes from father to son, whereas X DNA comes from both mother and father. But since the Neanderthal DNA we have in us is only the X DNA, or the maternal DNA, that means somehow the line of all the male Neanderthals has ended, while a small bit of the female line still persists in us today. So why is that? That's what I was wondering. That's where the thought experiment starts. So what's the simplest explanation for this? Well, we're so far removed from the Neanderthal ancestors that the Y DNA has just been lost over the years. In much the same way there's only a small percentage of maternal DNA left in us. Most of that's been lost too. It's just been diluted away. Another possibility is maybe male Homo sapien Neanderthal hybrids were sterile. So only the female hybrids reproduced and we never had any Neanderthal Y DNA to start with. But maybe that's a little boring. What if there was a way to make the explanation more interesting? And here it is. What if the Neanderthals were actually the fallen angels mentioned in the Bible and other ancient stories, like the Book of Enoch? And what if the Denisovans, or Denisovans, as they have sometimes been called, who are thought to have been giants, were the Nephilim offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men, the sons of God being the Neanderthals in this little thought experiment? And yes, I know some people say it should be pronounced Neanderthal, but if you want people to pronounce it that way, don't put an H in it. I'm going to say Neanderthals. Now, I'll go ahead and say here that I'm not concerned with whatever the established timelines for Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans are from the anthropological or paleontological perspective. If you've watched some of my earlier videos, you might know that I don't trust radiocarbon dating for prehistoric dates. I'm not going to go into all of that again here, but suffice to say, I don't think they have any way they can possibly account for any and all variances, known and unknown, in the decay rates of isotopes throughout the entire history of the world. So I don't think there is a way to verify the accuracy of their dates. I'm not saying they're always wrong. I'm not saying I have a better way to date prehistoric fossils. And I'm not saying I know how old any of the prehistoric fossils are. I'm just saying I don't think they know either. I know that they think they know, but I don't think they actually do. I'm also not going to be looking at more archaic bipedal species like Homo erectus. I'll just be assuming those are more ape-like or part of an earlier extinct creation. But back on topic. Even from a scientific paleontologic perspective, there is an overlap of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans in the timeline. And I don't think anyone's really questioning that or questioning that Neanderthals and modern humans intermingled at some point. I mean, we still average about 2% of their DNA in us, so nothing controversial there. But what if the story dreamed up by Darwinists that prehistoric Neanderthals and modern humans were all just a bunch of unintelligent hunter-gatherers isn't true? They think we both evolved from primitive ape species over the course of millions of years, but it doesn't work like that. Species don't evolve into other species. Sure, there's adaptations, but the adaptations are changes in what is turned on or off in the DNA. The possibility for the adaptations is already in the existing DNA when the adaptation occurs. One animal doesn't become a completely different kind of animal over time, and humans didn't evolve from apes. It's no secret an intermediary species has never been found in the fossil record. From the religious perspective, it's pretty simple, I think. We know we were created here. In this thought experiment scenario of mine, the Neanderthals are the sons of God mentioned in Genesis, who we also now know as the fallen angels. In Jewish legend outside of the Bible, when the angels come to earth, they put off their heavenly bodies and put on a physical human body. I don't think it's just a fallen angel thing. Even in other stories in the Bible where holy angels appear, sometimes no one recognizes them as such. They just look human. Think of the angels that appeared in Sodom as an example. They didn't know they were angels at first. I think that's kind of what you have here with the Neanderthals. They look human. Not exactly the same, and we don't really know for sure what they look like exactly. There's only so much you can tell from bones, but they look similar. For all we know, maybe they had pointy ears like elves. We really don't know. You can't tell that from a bone. But they look similar, maybe similar enough to pass as humans, or maybe in this case they didn't need to pass as humans. I mean, the Bible does refer to them as the sons of God, so maybe people knew there was something different about them. So if in this thought experiment the Neanderthals were the fallen angels, it's easy to explain where they came from a religious perspective. They just materialized here. It's what angels do when they want to interact directly with a human. They take a physical form. The difference between when a fallen angel and a holy angel takes human form is I think the fallen angels can't change back to their heavenly form, while the holy angels can change back. Now, at this level of the rabbit hole, the non-religious explanation would actually be easier to roll with here, because I could just say that the Neanderthals and modern humans intermingled, like we already know they did, and over time Neanderthal DNA has been diluted, or the male hybrids were sterile and never reproduced. Or from the religious perspective, it's actually a little more complicated here, because from the religious perspective, I think all of the original angels were male, or what we would view as male. The Bible says that angels don't marry, which is to say, they aren't separated into male and female and intended to have mates. Essentially, they are asexual, but they have masculine traits. So when they materialize in a physical form in our world, they materialize as male. There's evidence for female Neanderthals in the fossil record, so how can that be? I don't have much to go on here at this level from the religious perspective, so I think all I can do is speculate that perhaps the female Neanderthals weren't actually full Neanderthals at all, or were actually female hybrids of Neanderthals and modern humans whose traits favored their Neanderthal fathers. I think they were able to reproduce with other modern humans, and then over the course of many generations, we still have a little of that DNA left in us, which harkens back to where this little thought experiment started. The revelation that the Neanderthal DNA we still have in us today is only maternal. But this thought experiment didn't end there, because what about the giants that were supposedly the offspring of the sons of God and daughters of men? Well, for this part of the rabbit hole, I look to the Denisovans. They are another branch of humans that not a whole lot is known about, but based on the fossils found, it's likely they were larger than us, so giants. So what if the male hybrids of male Neanderthals and modern human women became the Denisovans? Remember, in this scenario of mine, the female hybrids were basically in the Neanderthal form, but what if the males came out differently? We know from the animal kingdom that when two similar species mate and reproduce together, sometimes the offspring grows larger than either of the parent species. I talked about this in an earlier video too. A prime example is a liger. A liger is the offspring of a male lion and a female tiger. Ligers grow larger than lions or tigers. So with that in mind, I think it's possible the offspring of a human and a Neanderthal might grow larger than a human or Neanderthal. Perhaps they became the Denisovans. Though I run into something that might be a problem here. At least one Denisovan fossil, maybe more, I'm not sure, but at least one is said to be female. The reason it might be a problem is because in this scenario, I would have expected the giant Denisovan males to be sterile, meaning they couldn't have children, meaning there wouldn't be females. In the example of the ligers, male ligers are sterile, but females can be fertile. So how can that be resolved? I'm not sure, other than to speculate that possibly somehow the male Denisovans weren't sterile, or at least not sterile from birth. Or maybe the females are the offspring of male Neanderthals and hybrid Neanderthal modern human females. I don't know. This is just somewhere my mind wandered to. I could be totally wrong about all of this. If I am, I apologize to our Neanderthal ancestors for maligning them and calling them fallen angels. But this still isn't the end of this thought experiment. Because what happened to all the Neanderthals and Denisovans? Well, the anthropologists have their own non-religious interpretation of what might have happened to them. They just went extinct over time. But I'm not an anthropologist, so I'm not going to get into that here. You can watch their videos if you want to know what they think happened. I'm going to use the religious interpretation here. In this case, the religious interpretation is the simple one. The Great Flood wiped them all away, leaving only us modern humans. In the Bible, everyone would ultimately descend from Noah and his sons. But the Bible also said the Nephilim were around in those days and also after the flood. So how can that be? Shouldn't all of the Nephilim have been wiped away? The Bible doesn't really elaborate on that at all. It just kind of moves on to the next story. But there is a Jewish legend that suggests that either the wife of Noah or one of his sons' wives was of Nephilim descent, which, in my thought experiment here, that would mean she was a female descendant of a Neanderthal and modern human, which, if true, it would explain why we still have some Neanderthal maternal DNA in us today. It would be because it was passed on through the wife of Noah or one of his sons' wives, who was named Nama. But I guess that also explains how the Nephilim were in the world after the flood. Perhaps not the giant ones, although other giants appear in later stories, but maybe that isn't the story here. Maybe this is referring to the ones that descended from a female who survived the flood. The Nephilim around after the flood would be her children, and her children's children. And then I guess the scary part of that is, that would mean we still have some of that left in us today. And that's basically where this thought experiment ends. Thinking about it that way makes that 2% Neanderthal DNA in us seem dirty. I don't know. Perhaps it is. Perhaps it doesn't matter. Though to be fair, in one version of the fallen angels story, those angels asked God to let them go to Earth and help humanity, but God said no and warned them they would not be able to resist temptations on Earth. But those angels were like, nah, it'll be fine, and still wanted to go anyway. God eventually relented and let them go, and then it wasn't fine because they couldn't resist the temptations, and so they had their way with human women and created a bunch of problems. I guess at least in that version of the story they might have at least had good intentions at first, but maybe it doesn't matter either way, because the good news is, from the religious perspective, which in this case is the Christian perspective, we can all be saved through the sacrifice of Jesus anyway if we choose to take that gift of salvation. That can be read about in the New Testament. Anyway, again, I could be totally wrong about the Neanderthals being fallen angels and the Denisovans being their giant offspring. This was just a thought experiment, not a belief, not a theory. But what do you think? Is anything from this thought experiment possible? Those are my thoughts on that. Thanks for listening.